Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something that affects millions of people. The dream of owning a home. Specifically, we're diving into the Philippines at a huge government program that promised to solve one of the country's biggest crises.
We are. And this is a story of just colossal ambition meeting some very, very hard economic realities. We're talking about the Pambansang Pabahay para sa Filipino program, or 4PH, and how this flagship initiative ended up being called a house built on sand.
Yeah, and when you look at the initial promise, you can really see why it gave so many families hope. The 4PH program, launched back in September 2022 by President Marcos, had this just staggering goal.
Staggering is the right word. The plan was to build at least 1 million low-cost housing units. Not total, but 1 million every year until 2028.
So that's a target of 6 million new homes.
6 million homes in 6 years. And you have to understand the context here. According to the UN Human Settlements Program, the housing backlog in the Philippines is already at a massive 6.5 million units.
So this program was basically designed to wipe that out completely.
Exactly. It affects about 3.7 million families who are, informal settlers. So this wasn't just a construction project. It was framed as a moral imperative.
The idea was to tackle it from all sides, right? Affordable financing, making permits easier to get, and partnering with the local government units, the LGUs, all run by the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development, the DHSUD.
Right. It was meant to cover everything, vertical condos and horizontal single-family homes, a total overhaul of their housing policy.
But our sources are telling us that just a few years later, it's all fallen apart. The dream has, well, it's shattered.
To put it mildly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. When a program this big, with this much political backing, fails so quickly, it can't be just one thing. Where do we first see the cracks appearing?
You see it in the internal numbers, and maybe even more, you see it in the bureaucracy itself. The failure was so obvious, it actually led to a big leadership change. Earlier this year, the head of the DHSUD, Jose Rizalino Acuzar, was replaced.
Replaced specifically because of the underperformance.
Explicitly. Jose Ramon Aliling was brought in because the program just wasn't delivering.
Okay, a leadership change is one thing, but what about the actual hard numbers? That promise of 1 million homes a year, how close did they get?
Not even remotely close. According to Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, who is looking at the performance data, the DHSUD, even at what they called full capacity, only completed 438,000 projects over the last 3 years.
Wait, 438,000 total?
Total. Over 3 years? That's less than half of what they promised for the first year. It just tells you the operational capacity was never there to begin with.
And this is where the story, for me, just gets frankly absurd. We're talking about an agency that needs all the resources it can get. But when the budget came up for review, the 4PH program's allocation was slashed from 700 million pesos to just 35 million.
Right. And the kicker is that massive cut was requested by the DHSUD itself.
I mean, think about that. You're entering a massive social crisis, and you voluntarily hand back 665 million pesos.
Their reason? They said they were unable to actually use the funds they were allocated over the last 2 years.
An inability to use the money. You have the need, you have the mandate, you have the funds, but you can't execute. What does that signal?
It tells you the bottleneck wasn't financial, not at that early stage. It was logistical and regulatory. They couldn't get the land, they couldn't get the LGU partnerships moving, they couldn't navigate the permits.
So they didn't have enough shovel-ready projects.
Yeah.
The money was sitting there, but the groundwork just hadn't been laid.
Precisely. The policy failed because the government couldn't even organize itself to spend the initial capital. But let's say they had. Let's say they'd sorted out all that bureaucracy. They still had to find someone to actually build the 6 million units.
Right. Which brings us to the supply side. You can't do this without private developers.
And what the sources show is that participation from developers was lukewarm, to be generous.
And why would they be? Developers are running businesses. They looked at the massive investment needed and saw no guarantee of a decent return. And this is where the government's affordability plan just crashed head-on into market reality.
It really did. The government's solution to the affordability crisis was price controls. They set these mandatory price ceilings on the units that were just way below current construction costs.
It was a built-in disincentive for anyone in construction.
Exactly. Let's look at the numbers. For a condo, the price was capped between 1.28 million and 1.8 million pesos. For a single-family home, it was even lower, like 844,000 to 950,000 pesos.
In today's market, that barely covers the cost of materials and labor. let alone the land itself.
Right. Developers aren't charities. And when the government basically says you must build this at a loss, well, the supply just disappears.
But hold on, isn't that what a big government program is for? To force the market to meet a social need? Why not subsidize the developers to cover that gap, instead of just mandating an impossible price?
And that is the critical question. The sources suggest the subsidies were all aimed at the buyer's side, the interest rate on the loan, not the supply side. They didn't help the builders cover their costs.
So they created a situation where the key partners, the developers, had absolutely zero reason to get on board.
Zero. And then, as if that wasn't a big enough hurdle, an external factor completely slammed the brakes on the vertical housing market.
The PO-GO connection.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating layer to it. Reports show there's now a huge 42-month glut and oversupply of condo units on the market.
And that's directly linked to the recent ban on PO-GOs, the Philippine offshore gaming operators.
It is. The staff for these PO-GO companies used to rent a huge number of these high-rise condos. They were a massive part of the rental market. When the PO-GOs were banned, all those tenants just vanished,
Leaving a giant overhang of empty apartments.
Now, if you're a developer, you're looking at the high-rise market, the very market the government wants you to build in, and you see a massive glut and years of uncertainty. It makes taking a risk on a low-margin government project like 4PH even less attractive.
So it's a perfect storm. The supply side completely collapses.
Yeah.
Developers won't build at the low prices, and the market they're supposed to build for is already oversaturated because of a totally separate policy decision.
Which brings us to the other half of this equation, maybe the more important half, the affordability wall for the families themselves. We have to shift from the cost to build to the capacity to pay.
Okay, so the system was built on the idea that the government would subsidize the loans. PAGABEG, the housing agency, was ready to cut interest rates from around 10% way down to 3% for these borrowers.
A 3% interest rate. On paper, that sounds amazing, a huge subsidy. But our sources call this a subsidy illusion.
A subsidy illusion, how so?
Because even with a low interest rate, you still have the main loan payment. And then you add on monthly condo dues, you add maintenance, you add utilities, and that monthly payment is still a crushing amount for a low-income family.
So the experts are saying the subsidy was just a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound.
Absolutely. The urban planner Nathaniel von Einsiedel pointed this out. He said the real problem isn't the mortgage rate, it's the low income of the families. You just can't finance your way out of poverty.
And this was confirmed by that big study from the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, PIDs, right?
Yes, their study was definitive. It found that wages have completely failed to keep up with rising housing costs. It's the core disconnect.
So the PIDS conclusion is that the whole model priced ceilings on one side, interest subsidies on the other. It was always going to fail.
It was doomed because it never addressed the root cause. The entire 4PH model was trying to fix a housing problem while ignoring the economic reality of the people it was for.
Which the source material calls crippling poverty. That low income is what keeps families in makeshift homes to begin with. Any repayment plan, no matter how cheap, becomes impossible.
So if you can't subsidize your way out of this, it forces you to admit that this isn't just a housing crisis, it's an economic crisis.
Housing policy can't exist in a vacuum.
It can't. And the sources are pretty clear that solving the 6.5 million unit backlog means looking far beyond just building houses.
Okay, so let's look at those bigger, more holistic solutions that were suggested. If price caps and loan subsidies don't work, what's step one?
Step one, you have to address the poverty and the low wages head on. That means a serious look at more realistic wage standards. Now, the challenge is obviously doing that without sinking the small businesses that employ so many people.
It's a tough balance. And beyond wages, the government needs to be more active in creating jobs.
Absolutely. Regular institutionalized job creation, job fairs, anything so that families can actually get the stability they need to even think about a 30-year loan.
And finally, there's the geography of the problem. All the pressure is on the big cities.
It is. The final piece of the puzzle is economic decentralization. You have to spread jobs, development, and infrastructure out into the rural and suburban areas. You have to stem this constant migration into already overflowing cities like Metro Manila, where being jobless almost guarantees you'll be homeless.
So unless the government looks at all these other factors, wages, jobs, decentralization, the sources warn that the dream of owning a home for the average Filipino is just going to collapse, like a house of cards.
And that really leaves us with a final thought for you. Think about that PO-GO story. A major policy decision, the PO-GO ban, was made for, regulatory or social reasons in one specific sector.
Right.
But that one move created a huge glut in the condo market, which then made developers even more hesitant to invest in low-cost housing, a completely separate, critical area of need. So the question to think about is, how often does a well-intentioned policy in one area accidentally cripple progress somewhere else entirely? It's a reminder that every economic decision sends ripples far beyond its intended target.